Well, I just watched Jerome Powell's speech at the National Association for Business Economics, and boy, does he know how to gaslight Fed critics. Given all the stimulus talks that are going on right now in Washington, which Powell has been a big proponent of, he in a way kicked them off by signaling an end to the Powell put a few weeks ago, which I've talked about extensively. He said essentially that the Fed is out of ammo and it's time for Congress to start, getting into gear and just spending lots of money into the economy because Fed stimulus can only do so much at this point. And so he beat that drum quite a bit today, encouraging Congress to spend as much as they can, saying that there really is, you can't spend too much when it comes to right now. Just telling Congress, oh my gosh, we've got, you've already got trillions and trillions, added to the deficit this year. Why not add a few more trillion? Which I have to say, it's pretty ironic coming from supposedly someone who's a Republican on the Federal Reserve Board, a more conservative member, someone who has warned about the dangers of the national debt in the past. Just sort of, I guess, puts into perspective just how big of a fraud every single one of these people are, because it's not like Powell has no idea what he's doing, and I go back and forth on this with certain different people at the Fed. The only person that I've ever really understood entirely at the Fed on a personal level was Greenspan. Greenspan, I have a lot of respect for as a thinker and as as an economic thinker. I thought he knew exactly what he was doing. I just thought that he did things that were very evil and self-serving. But I can at least look at Greenspan's actions and say, I understand what he's saying. When he says things, I know when he's lying and when he's telling the truth. He made sense to me. But Bernanke, I always thought was, just a dumber Greenspan. He was emulating Greenspan's actions, but didn't necessarily understand, the underlying logic of what Greenspan was doing. A lot of this has to do with Bernanke being very much a Chicago school economist. 100% buys into Milton Friedman's theory behind the Great Depression, that it was caused by the Fed not printing enough money, which is a theory that Greenspan was not nearly dumb enough to believe. Powell, though, because he's not an economist, he doesn't really have a track record of writings. He was, I believe, an attorney. I think that's what Powell did before he worked for the Fed. I'd imagine a corporate attorney of some kind. He doesn't have a clear economic theory. He's not from a particular school of thought. He doesn't have decades of writing like Greenspan or Bernanke. And so I've always leaned more towards thinking that Powell was just kind of more of the ignorant type, someone who was making all of these mistakes and honestly didn't know what he was doing was wrong or what the effects it would have, that he was just sort of looking around in the dark. And I've had encounters with people from the Fed who I definitely would say this about 100%. They had no idea what they were doing, and they've admitted that. But in Powell's speech today, he said something which, to me, signaled, 100% that he knows exactly what he's doing, and that he is purposefully being dishonest and gaslighting his critics. Because he used the words today that, in response to the people who say that this recession, this depression that we're in the middle of is just, it's the bubble bursting, the Fed's bubble, the air coming out, the bubble that Powell and others blew. And he rejected this notion, which I have to say he did address it, which normally does not happen from the Fed. The Fed would not address critics, but he addressed it, and he said there was no unsustainable boom to burst and there was no bubble to pop. The fact that he would even use the phrase unsustainable boom tells me that he's at least somewhat familiar with the argument, that he has heard, the idea before. And if that's the case, he can't just plead ignorance. I can't just say Powell has no idea what he's talking about, because it's clear here that he does know what he's talking about and that he's just lying. Because if you're at all familiar with the argument, behind the unsustainable boom, i.e. Austrian business cycle theory, you know that what the Fed does and what, even if the Fed didn't exist, what our banking system does creates the unsustainable boom. There's always an unsustainable boom. And Powell has the gall to say that, not only are we recovering nicely from this, very, very short depression, but he says, you know what, this recovery would be even faster if we had fiscal stimulus from the government, because, that's really what will get businesses going again. Because, if we don't, he said, if we don't get that stimulus, then what will happen is you'll have more businesses that will go under and go bankrupt, and people who will be displaced from work, and that will just completely, that will reorient the structure of the economy. And we can't have that. Because we're going so great, we got to keep it going. And so what he's saying is these businesses that are dying, these businesses that cannot survive in this new reality, must be propped up by the government until some later date, some undetermined later date in which these businesses suddenly become profitable on their own again. And I have to give you a hint, that date will never come. We have this phenomenon in Japan and other places and in the United States called zombie corporations. And I guess Powell wants not just zombie corporations, which we already have here, but zombie small businesses. Basically, anyone who has any employees, Powell seems like he wants to prop up those businesses until some later date in which they become relevant. Well, the fact of the matter is that the economy can't recover unless you free up these scarce resources, which are used by these unprofitable businesses. If your business is not making money and you're in fact losing money, that is the market sending you a signal that you are not employing those scarce resources, that labor, that land, that capital, in a way that is valuable to the community. You are in fact wasting scarce resources. And so what Powell wants the federal government to do is to try and perpetuate that. He wants the federal government to spend a bunch of money to try and, help businesses waste resources. And when you do that, you're not going to grow the economy. You can't grow the economy if you're wasting resources. You're just consuming scarcity then. You're not producing anything of value. If you're not making a profit, then things aren't growing. That by definition, it might not be a boom because it's not going to be it's not going to be great, even if the government spends a bunch of money. We're not going to have even a hint of a great boom. But it's going to be unsustainable. It could be, unsustainable stagnation. That's probably a pretty decent way of looking at it. Because if the federal government is propping up failing businesses, as Powell wants, to keep people employed, well, then those resources are still going to be employed, by these failing businesses, and so there's not going to be any opportunity for people to start new businesses, because all the resources are still taken up by these old ones. You have a boom when resources are cheap and people decide, hey, I'm going to start a business. And I'm going to hire people, and I'm going to employ these resources to try and produce something of value. That's what creates a boom. It's new businesses starting up, and those booms can be unsustainable if they're just driven by Fed liquidity, or some kind of government tax incentive scheme or whatever, kind of like the alpaca tax credits that created a boom in people raising alpacas in the United States. It wasn't a boom rooted in any real consumer demand. So what Powell is calling for here is, at best, the stagnation of the U.S. economy, not the start of a new boom, because there can't be a new boom unless you let the old bubble die and crash. That happened to some extent in 2008, 2009. We had the air come out somewhat of the bubble. It didn't crash all the way to the bottom, or else we would have had a very healthy recovery. We had a very slow recovery, but there was still some recovery because we did have a decline. Now Powell does not want any decline to happen at all. It doesn't want businesses going bankrupt. It doesn't want people losing their jobs, which again is painful. It's not nice to lose your job, but the job losses are one small component of the overall economic picture. It's about reconfiguring the structure of production. It's about the availability of raw materials. So Powell is saying we just, we hit pause and we freeze everything the way it is. Now the downside is that there is a possibility that things do not simply freeze the way they are, but the stimulus provided by the federal government might have an unintended side effect, and that, of course, being moderately high inflation, higher than the 2% that Powell is targeting. In fact, Powell today said that he is targeting over 2% inflation because inflation's been below 2% for quite a long time. So we need to have inflation over 2%. Well, he might get his wish if the Congress actually is spending money and giving it directly to businesses, or to smaller businesses, or even directly to families, which is something that Powell kind of touched upon in his speech briefly. So not only do we have economic stagnation because failing businesses are kept alive and new businesses are prevented from from getting off the ground, but we could have inflation because of all of this new money just being handed out to people without any requisite increase in production. Now, I don't think people remember the 1970s as a particularly good time economically in the United States. But from everything he said today, the 1970s is exactly where Powell wants to take this country back to. And so we'll just have to see if Congress, follows his wishes. And it certainly, as I discussed yesterday, seems like there's a lot of motivation for that in Washington. Depending on how truly inclusive any potential stimulus bill would be, is really going to determine, how bad it is. It might seem counterintuitive, but the more people who are helped by this bill, the worse it will have, the worse of an effect it will have on the overall economy. Because if, like in 2008, we just see a bailout of a few select well-connected businesses like General Motors and the big banks and all these sorts of companies, that's not going to have a huge effect on the overall economy. Because there are still, so many thousands and thousands of small businesses that will get no assistance, just like what happened in 2008, and they will be allowed to go bankrupt, just like General Motors should have gone bankrupt, just like all the big banks should have gone bankrupt. But at least, much of the economy is still able to adjust. This time around, if they truly do, as Powell is saying, try and help out these smaller businesses, try and help out individual families, all of this money is, instead of being concentrated in the hands of, some big players who are not going to really spend that money into the economy and create inflation, this money is going to be handed out to people who need the money, people who are going to take that money and go pay their bills, people who are going to take that money and buy food, people who are going to take that money and pay their mortgage. This, as I've warned over and over again, is a recipe for creating real inflation. So, with that said, if you gained anything of value to this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please just subscribe because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So, I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.